When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsey Fox and Amber Ross. So today we are going to be talking about highly sensitive people over the holidays. But before we get started, we want to remind you that today's episode is sponsored by therapyappointment.com. Therapy Appointment is an EMR used for therapists, and it was designed by therapists. And even better, if you are searching for a therapist in an area near you, please go to therapyappointment.com to find one today. So, Amber,
Lindsey,
I've got questions.
Oh, here we go.
I've got questions because you and I have talked about this topic a bit, off the record, but I am super curious. We hear a lot about like an empath. What is an empath and what is a highly sensitive person? And I kind of feel like they kind of get tossed around in different ways by different people, depending on the context. So for today's episode, what do you think of when you think of like a highly sensitive person?
I will answer the question, but before I do, I think it's hilarious that you point that out because as many times as we've talked about the two things separately, you and I've never talked about them together, and my brain never made a connection between the two words, empath or highly sensitive person. So first of all, that's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, that's actually a really fun fact. That's even more fascinating because now I'm like, really?
You're like, wait, what was going on in your brain when we were talking about these things? I'm sure
what
we'll
were you
cover
talking
that.
about?
Lord, who knows?
Well, now we're about to find out.
Yes, true. We're going to go down a fun foxhole episode that's going to talk about all the things because you're right. We've talked about this on the podcast as well as in our own private conversations, like the idea of highly sensitive people and kind of what that looks like. But I don't think we've ever gone into our personal definitions of it. So like for me, a highly sensitive person, when I think of that, I think of someone who is perceptive. And when I say perceptive, I mean someone who's reading body language really well as second nature, not someone who's studied body language, right? Those are two different aspects.
Excellent call out. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like we're going to get in depth here. You know how my brain works.
Yeah, I like it.
Because I consider myself a highly sensitive person because like a facial expression from someone talking to me will tell me everything I need to know as far as if I need to stop talking or like change the subject, right? That's, to me, I'm being highly sensitive to someone else's projections of thoughts, not.
Yes.
I hope that makes sense. Like
it does. What I'm hearing you say. So what I'm hearing you say is that you feel highly attuned to other people's emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also like if I think about someone who's highly sensitive, I often see those folks as being overthinkers, being people who consider themselves intuitive, being people who are maybe more compassionate or empathetic than the next person, right? Because they're constantly
empathetic. Did you say empathetic?
I did say empathetic, but like, yes, you're right. Yes.
They align.
And it still did not cross my mind empath, because in my mind, like society has a very clear definition, and it's not necessarily typically a positive one of someone who considers himself an empath, right?
Oh, really? Now, can we kind of do a sidetrack on that piece? Like, what do you think?
I think we'll get there. Okay, so that's a hard one for me to answer. So when I think of someone who says, I am an empath, or I consider myself an empath, I think of someone who is participating or maybe more invested in aspects of spirituality or spiritual aspects of their life. Does that make sense?
Sure. Like you kind of associate a spiritual journey or awakening piece that someone is aligning with when they kind of identify themselves as an empath.
Yes. If you say to me, I consider myself an empath, that is different to me than if you say, I am an empathetic person. I think one is analytical. Right. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Even that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would actually say I am, I guess if we're looking at both of these things, it's as being two different things. I would say I'm a highly sensitive person who is an empath.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Hmm. That's it's really neat to hear your perspective. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, of
And
course.
to our listeners, like, tell us, do you think you're like there's a difference between a highly sensitive person versus an empath? I'm so curious now.
Or
Um,
also, let's complicate it and throw in the third one, an empathetic person, or a person who can have empathy for another human.
or D, all the above, because I kind of think they're all the above,
Yeah,
but
I
that's
think
what I
there's
want to kind
different
of dabble in
elements to
today.
it. Sure.
Sure. And so the whole purpose of today's episode is kind of talking about what do you do when you are a highly sensitive person trying to navigate really complex spaces of there being lots of noises and crowds and sensory stuff all around you,
Well,
because
and let's complicate it, right? Holiday season and what we've been talking about off and on, the fact that you may be around people that give off bad energy or that you don't want to be around or that you have history of traumatic or like bad
absolutely
experiences with, like all of these things, all of these are challenging for a person who does not consider themselves as highly sensitive. They
totally
are 1,000 times more challenging for someone who does consider themselves highly sensitive.
100%. I definitely agree with you. And so I think first things first, let's kind of dive into some of the psych stuff and
Yeah.
then like round out the latter half of the episode around the self-care needs of a highly sensitive person and how to do that during these kind of holiday stressful holiday events or just stressful life events. Um, so I think first things first, when I talk about a highly sensitive person, I'm also talking about someone who like in the context of empathy, an empathic person, however you want to label the individual, but highly sensitive person comes back to this spectrum of empathy. So I think first it's identifying and labeling the fact that empathy exist on a spectrum. On one end, people, and I'm not talking about highly sensitive person, I'm saying on one end, empathy can exist on the total opposite end of the spectrum where a person is lacking it. So that
Okay.
might be the individual that where there is antisocial tendencies, maybe a heavy dose of narcissism at play. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is that highly sensitive person. So this person has an overage of empathy, if you will, to where at times it can become debilitating. So when I think about that, I think of someone who is very like highly attuned to other energy. So other people, places, things, and the energy of other people, places, and things to the extent where they can kind of assume that as their own.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
then they're carrying that as if it's their own. Um, so you can see for someone who might not be as familiar with a highly sensitive person, also known as HSP, that individual can probably feel really drained very quickly being around a lot of people because it's so much to absorb with that overage of empathy of kind of being so hyper connected to another person's experience that it takes away from your own ability to be present and in that experience. I'm going to take a pause right there. I know there's a lot more
Yeah,
that I want to get into, but I want to just take a pause for a moment and kind
I
of
think
check
there's
in.
a lot wrapped in that. And in my mind, as you were talking, I'm also seeing a person who takes all of that information, whether consciously or subconsciously, and puts everyone else's needs first, right? So like
Bingo.
I think their needs get lost in the mix somewhere. And
Hmm.
it's I envision a bunch of fires and it's like, okay, which one do I tackle first? It's the biggest one. Well, which one feels the biggest? Yours, not
Right.
mine.
Right. It's about putting your needs on the back burner, right? I mean, that's what happens is that these people tend to be the fixers.
Hmm.
Granted, just as a call out for, I know I cannot speak for you, but I can kind of say I think this is the case, and definitely for me too. I've done a lot of work over the years to work on this role as a highly sensitive person,
Yep.
because I do understand that it comes from a place of trauma. And so that's the other connection here I want to make for our listeners is the fact that um, by being highly attuned to other people, we are taking on other people's stuff as our own and then trying to move through that. And so it is a level of hypervigilance, if you will, in terms of being that emotional
Mm.
attunement. and it is a high level of hypervigilance and being able to attune to other people's energy. Because if we look at it through the lens, a trauma informed lens of how trauma works, that keeps you safe, right? So being very attuned to another person's energy helps keep you safe. It helps you attune to and adapt to whatever the environment is at play. And in this context of a highly sensitive person, that means you are fawning. A fawn response is kind of like that people-pleasing response, kind of like being a chameleon and adapting to your environment.
Absolutely. And for a lot of years, I thought that was like a superpower that you could.
It can be.
Well, it can be.
It can be.
It can be in some
can
cases.
Keep you alive.
Yes, I agree. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily very healthy long-term, right? Mentally healthy. I think it's one of those that is a superpower that's necessary in certain situations or instances, but when it becomes your entire way of life and every interaction and every relationship is something, like, I hesitate to use the word fake, but it is an element of
you lose yourself
and pretending and not being authentic.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, hearing the word fake, it's kind of like, I know it's a jab. I know you don't mean, I know that the word choice or whatever, I totally get that. But you're right in the sense that you're not being authentic with yourself because you're so connected with others and trying to attune to others. You're not listening to what you need. And I think in general, in the US culture or Western society and how we look at the holidays, that's what it's all about. I mean, we get lots of advertising and pushing of like capitalism down our throat and how can we attend to others, even if it's at the violation of your own moral code and boundaries. Which is a problem.
Absolutely. And it's a problem. It's a long-standing problem, right? I mean, in families, in friendships, in work relationships, everywhere.
Totally. Yep.
I'm not going to love you unless you buy me the most expensive gift on the planet, or, your husband doesn't love you unless he gives you that $20,000 diamond ring for Christmas, or, whatever the case may be, which
it's ridiculous.
It's a crock. Yes.
So I want to go back to how this is a trauma response just for a moment before we get into that, because something that we know through research about trauma is that when we experience when we are exposed to trauma, repeat trauma or what have you, it can change the development of how our brain works. And so ultimately, think of it this way. It affects our neural pathways. So if we're kind of taking this back to a highly sensitive person, right, and what a highly sensitive person does and how they respond to their environment, and we kind of reframe this through the lens of a trauma lens, there is a reshaping of how our brain functions to the degree that we can label this as a element of neurodivergence.
Okay.
Per se. Okay. So when I say neurodivergence, I mean diversity in the brain. I know a lot of people might hear neurodivergence and they jump straight to ASD and ADHD.
Yes.
ASD is autism spectrum disorder, and then attention deficit disorder. And these are two types of information processing disorders. So let's look at that, right? Information processing. What's a highly sensitive person struggle with?
Processing information.
Bingo! Attuning to other people's stuff and taking it all in, right? It's still sensory stuff.
It
is.
And
so, whether people want to, and I'm not, just to be clear, we're not getting into diagnostics and labels and all this, but whether
not at all.
This person, no, not at all. So like, let's keep that at bay. But ultimately, whether it's, ASD, complex PTSD, ADHD, saying that you're a highly sensitive person or an empath, whatever the case, there's diversity in the brain that is, that still kind of has that presentation of like a hypervigilance and a fawning that can take place at times when we're feeling like overwhelmed by all the stuff that's taking place in our world, in our environment. Like where we can get very overwhelmed. So when we're not aware of the traits of burnout that are taking place because of what our exposure is of attuning to too much, our nervous system is shutting down and saying, hey, you need a break. You need a break.
Yeah.
And so for the highly sensitive person, what does this look like for us? It looks like isolation. It looks like being an extreme introvert during periods of time.
It looks like physical illnesses.
It can, sure, it certainly can as it accrues, but just on like a surface level piece of just what do you need to reset your energy during burnout? That's when those really intense periods of isolation, quiet time, extreme introvert kind of presentation kind of kicks in because your nervous system is begging you to reset.
Yeah. And I want to go a little bit further with what I say physical illness, right? So for me personally, when I get to that level of burnout, it's when I see myself getting sick over and over again, or I get a cold that won't go away, or I get, pneumonia for 9 months. These are actual things that happen. Yeah, I was pregnant with Hudson.
Okay, there's a lot to that. Let's just
there's a lot to that one.
There's a lot more than the HSP thing going on with that.
No, for me, like if I'm over indexing on other people's needs and I'm over indexing on all of the things happening around me and I'm not creating time for my own personal self-care, that's when my body starts to break. And like my immune system is the first thing to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, which makes sense because again, we talked about this in that episode, trauma, little T and big T trauma.
Yeah.
I can't remember what episode number that is, but I remember we were talking about that then too. It's just about all the research that shows how trauma affects us at a cellular level, which can then kind of come up in the form of like autoimmune disorders and physical illnesses.
Yep.
So I totally agree with you, Amber. I don't have like any kind of research journals to point to right now, but I totally agree with you.
Let me tell you what, the human body is an absolute miracle and an absolutely incredible machine. We are not really doing a great job of caring for.
Yeah, well, definitely not in the Western world, but because when you think about like, Chinese medicine or more holistic approaches that are more normalized in the Eastern philosophy and way of life, we're just not there yet. There's pockets of people that are kind of leaning into it, but it's just not mainstream as it stands for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think since we're kind of in a theme here of holiday habits, holiday self-care, taking care of yourself through the holidays, with specific regard to people who are highly sensitive or people who are highly empathetic, I think there's a lot of things we can do that society doesn't necessarily show us, right? So let's talk about self-care, okay?
Yeah, like what do we think about?
Yeah, if you Google self-care, the things that are typically going to come up first are bubble baths, spa days, a manicure, a pedicure, a shopping spree. Okay, I'm not saying any of those are not good ways to take care of yourself, right?
I do kind of like retail therapy, not
yes. Yes. And they can be effective. However, those are not the full picture of all like a holistic approach to self-care,
particularly for a highly sensitive person, because it's so much more than just taking a bubble bath and then going out to public spaces to go shopping. Like that's
honestly, it's like putting
a
Band-Aid on something that needs like 75 stitches, right? Like you have a broken leg, you've got a bone sticking out. I'm gonna put a Band-Aid on that and it's gonna be all good. It doesn't really work like that.
Oh, but if only it did. But there's a lot of us lying to ourselves saying that that's all we need. And because it's the bare minimum, right? It's this idea of let me give myself the bare minimum and then I'll keep going. And so if we can kind of figure out a way to reframe and switch our thought process around how to give to others through giving from a place of overflow rather than depletion, what a beautiful world we would be living in.
Absolutely. I saw, I think this was something that Rachel Hollis shared several years ago, but it was this idea that, you can't pour from an empty cup or you have to fill your cup first or, whatever, right? Which we use that and we see it used quite frequently. But in her analogy, she said, well, what if instead of a cup, it were like a flower vase and you keep filling it up with water And the water that overflows is what you get to gift other people. So we're not just filling our cup so that I can then pour my cup out for you. I'm filling my cup to the point that it runs over, and that abundance is where I get to gift from.
That's right.
And I just I love that picture in my mind because, quite frankly, I'm a little tired of people haphazardly saying, fill your cup first, specifically to moms in general, sleep when the baby sleeps. What if your kid doesn't sleep? Do I sleep when he's 18? This doesn't make sense to me. So initially the fill your cup first methodology, it used to irritate me. And it was one of those that I'm like, that is not helpful. Because if I fill my cup and then I empty it for you, I have to go back to work to fill my cup again. It's not, it's a rinse, repeat.
So I think it's both end of fill your cup, continue to fill your cup. Don't stop filling your cup. And you can share with others when your cup is full enough to do so as you continue to fill your cup.
It's that and part, because I think so much of society is either or, this or that. It's not... we don't utilize and nearly enough. So when I heard the analogy of, the overflowing flower vase, I was like, that's it. That's what we need to be doing. This has to be a continuous self-care. And it's not financially responsible for your continuous self-care to be shopping sprees every day, right?
Right. No, not at all. Not at all. And a lot of people do that as a superficial way of healing. We see that all the time, particularly in our culture here in the United States, because that is how we operate, just kind of buy stuff, and everything will be fine. But let's kind of talk about, what that self-care looks like for a highly sensitive person when it is more than just bath bombs and retail therapy.
Absolutely. So one that I have started being very intentional about, because it was actually called out at work, and it was someone I work with calling it out in kindness for me, right? This was an area of growth. And he shared with me, he said, Amber, you don't take any time to celebrate the victory of the week. He said, you are one of those people that you push. You go. You get everything done, everything everybody needs. We get it in just under the wire, and then you immediately move to the next crisis. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. And I'm a project manager. So I am the crisis person. That is,
I feel that
my
to
job
my core,
description.
girl. Mm-hmm.
So what we have started implementing is on Fridays, we have a 10-minute win of the week. We take a moment to say something big or small that happened that week that we were proud of ourselves for, a win of the week.
I love that.
It's such a nice self-care item that doesn't cost any money and doesn't take very much time.
Right. I like that a lot. So I've kind of done, just over time or whatever, not with any set routine in mind, but maybe even with a vacation that I've taken or whatever, where I'll kind of reflect on what was the peak in the pit.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of reflect on that. But I like that, a win of the week, because I too struggle with this where just holding space for the small W's, even when they are small, but holding space for them. And this is something that I remember guest speaker Deb Riegel, whenever we talked about her book, Go to Help, Deb and Sophie Riegel, that the 31st strategy in that book is to remember to celebrate.
Yes.
And I feel that's absolutely one of those things that we could all work on a little bit, particularly the highly sensitive people out there.
Yeah, because what do you do? You're running around cleaning up everybody's messes, and you don't take a minute to go, man, I did a good job, because society tells us we're not allowed to say that, right? You're not allowed to pat yourself on the back, because then you're conceited or you're boasting or you're, whatever.
But I would like
to
just acknowledge that I feel like you and I have done a great job in really trying to celebrate our personal wins working together, and the development of this podcast, and when we kind of hit certain mile marks, whether it's listeners or how many certain episodes or guest speakers, it's I feel like we've been doing a pretty good job about patting ourselves on the back and being like, man, we nailed that, or we did a good job on this. And I'm really proud of us for creating that space just within, just the two of us, and being able to do that, because it is important.
I do agree. And I also think we've done a good job personally on that too. So like it's commonplace for you and I to say, hey, I want to share something I'm proud of myself for. I want to
Yeah.
share something that I'm excited about. Like I want to
Yeah.
share something that went well this week. It's not just like we talk about the hard things. We talk about when the week was like went to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
But we also make some space to
Yep.
celebrate something that went well. And I think that
Yep.
is an act of self-care, like
Totally.
through and through. And it's one that's doesn't cost money, doesn't take a ton of time, doesn't
That's
take
right.
a ton of energy, believe it or not.
Right. No,
So that's
even if
a
it's quick
yeah,
text message and a couple of little celebratory emojis, like great.
yeah, awesome job.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if I think about, so in the same vein of that, like in the same theory, I think I showed you this the other day, but I have a good things jar. So I have a jar on my desk that I use every year. It's the same one. And throughout the year, I have little snips of paper that when something good happens, I write it down on the jar and I just put it in, right? And I say, like, whatever the month was, whatever the thing was, like why it made me happy. I I don't put a lot of thought, like I don't put a lot of time consuming thought into this. It's something that, oh, that made me smile. I'm going to put it in the good things jar.
Yeah.
And then on like either sometime between December 30th and January 2nd, I set aside time by myself to go through my good things
Oh,
jar and
yeah,
like
year
relive
in
those
review.
moments. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I completely forgot that you did this. And you
Um,
know what? Here's the thing. You've told me this probably 3 times, I guess. I don't know. Every single time I hear it, it's like my first time hearing it with this beautiful aha moment every time. Like, oh, I love that idea. I should do that. And I just don't. And I forget all about it. But I love that you do it. I love that it works for you. And then I love getting your text messages with like little pictures of some of the wins that you've written
yeah.
down and added to your jar. But I'm like, oh, that's cool. Thanks for the reminder, Amber.
Well,
That's
and
cool.
it's twofold because I do send those pictures to people. If I put something in my jar that was noteworthy and it included you, I try to take the time to take a picture of it and share it with that person so that I can say,
Hmm.
this was meaningful to me. This made me feel good. Like this was something I took notice of. So then I am filling my cup and
Yeah.
helping to fill someone else's with something that is meaningful and something that is tangible.
Yep. And it doesn't require a ton of energy. So again, going back to like the highly sensitive person thing of not right in terms of, sorry, Amber just made like a little hand motion here.
Sorry,
She's
I
like,
pointed at my head.
bingo,
I'm like,
like
bingo, yes,
bingo.
light bulb.
Yep. Yeah. Where it's like, maybe we don't have a lot of energy because you are feeling some kind of way around all the life stressors and holidays and all that stuff. But like those little moments that Amber's talking about, those are just like quick little snippets of how you can nourish your friendships from afar, still kind of like in your own introverted way when you need space, but like just sending a quick text of saying like,
Yeah.
oh, bing, this was in my thing, just letting you know you're thought of, you're loved, it's nice. So
It's
let's
good. It's
talk
a
about
feel
some of
good
the
moment. Go ahead.
it is. No, I just want to kind of go back to what we had started with. I know we kind of like went off on a side thing there, but with regard to boundaries for our listener, or excuse me, boundaries. I'm sorry, in my head I'm like, oh, that's one of them. But with regard
Boundaries.
to
Yes,
like,
that's a good
yeah,
one.
some of like the self-care tools for a highly sensitive person that are not so normalized. So I just kind of wanted to circle back to that in my head. One of them, of course, was like boundaries.
And
So my,
saying no.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yeah. Did you
I
have
think
any others that were kind of heavy on your mind or that list
I mean,
of
I have
things?
a very long list, as you can
Well, let's
imagine,
get
because
into it, girl.
I pull from a lot of different tasks. Boundaries and learning to say no to things that are not serving you is a
Mm,
huge act of self care. Now, that one, it does take energy and it takes intention and it takes a lot of awareness. So it's one that's on my list. It's one that doesn't pop up as often because I'm not like, I can't in a moment of stress be like, I'm going to go set a boundary with this person that has nothing to do with the situation I'm in. So
yeah.
that one isn't as easy to implement or as frequent to implement. But something that is for me when I'm in a moment of stress or in a moment of like feeling everybody's feels, sometimes I like to turn the volume down on that, right? So I'll do something simple that takes 5 minutes. Like I will clear a pile of junk off of my desk. I will gather the shoes that have made their way all around the house or all around the front porch and put them back where they belong.
Yeah.
I will pick up the stray socks or, the stray jackets or whatever the case may be, something that is amiss or out of place in my environment. I will take the 5 minutes and go put it back where it belongs. And it's like, it's an act of quiet self-care of like, okay, hey, I finished a task. I get to mark that off the list and I can celebrate that win and we can roll on.
It feels so good to do that. And I love that. I love how small that example is, because I can think of just the other night. It was, I don't know what, I was up late. Like I just had a lot of energy and I was just not, whatever it was, I was like, I know I should be doing whatever, but I was like, I want to finish putting all the dishes away. I have a weird thing about, I want all my dishes in the dishwasher before I go to sleep, and just creating this like little bit of time to do that. And whenever I'm finished, it just is it feels so satisfying. Even if the rest of my room, my kitchen is like a complete disaster and like a shitstorm, it's like, I'll get to that later. But tonight the dishes are going in the dishwasher and I'm going to walk away feeling fine. Like, I'm so glad I did that much today. Yep.
Yes. And I think we over index on things like, I need to overhaul my whole closet. Like this needs to be, needs to be Marie Kondoed, right? Like that was the whole thing for, I don't know, at least a year.
Minimalist society. Let's do all the things. And it's like, that feels very overwhelming whenever you just
minimalist society, but let's buy all the plastic containers to organize all the things in and make that like, I have thoughts. We can take that to a separate episode.
Some might not work for others. Whatever floats your boat and fills your cup, so be it. But
and I think the point I'm trying to make here, society will tell you you have to do something big and grand as an act of self-care. They will tell you it has to be flashy. They will tell you it has to be like grandiose and there has to be bells and whistles. Truly, there doesn't have to be. It can be what means the most to you or what you need the most in that moment. And I think a little bit of self-reflection, of understanding, what's your love language? What does that look like? Share that with a friend or a loved one so that they can show up for you in a way that you can receive. That's self-care.
It is. Yeah. Stating your needs and letting other people know what they are. Y'all, this sounds so simple, and yet it is so freaking hard because we don't understand why people don't show up in the way that we need them. But then we, like, when you get really quiet and allow yourself to sit in that space, it's like, oh, well, shit, I didn't even tell them what I needed. So how am I supposed to expect them to show up if I did not communicate what my needs were?
That's a hard one. And honestly, that was the next thing on my list, being willing to ask for help.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
Like that is self-care, being willing to phone a friend, phone somebody and say, SOS, I need help.
Yeah, totally.
Like I've got ish going on that I can't handle. And that help could be, come sit on my kitchen floor and cry with me. Like, please come help me put my dishes in the dishwasher. Like whatever that thing is.
Yes. It doesn't have, again, that doesn't have to be grandiose, I mean, I can think of the other day, I just needed to do something and I was so task saturated. It's just this time of year too.
Yes.
Because it's the end of the year. So anyone, especially when you own your own business, it's like there's so much stuff that you have to get squared away. And yes, I get it. Taxes aren't due until a few months. I get that. But there's just so much stuff that you have to get in order for the end of year, on top of sustaining your regular full-time life as a human, and then you throw in holidays. It's just a lot. But the other day I thought, oh my gosh, my poor dog has not gone on a walk today. I felt so bad because I had just been crunching at my computer all day long. And I thought, Lindsey, today your piece of self-care is you're going to make it to that yoga class, whether you want to do it or not. You're going. And then I thought, oh, but what about my sweet dog? Like, she needs her walk. So I almost said, no, I'm going to take the walk instead of going to yoga class. And instead I said, no, you need all the above. So I reached out to a neighbor and I said, hey, you have a fenced in backyard. Can you just take my dog for the hour that I'm at yoga? I'll pick her up afterward and I'll give her a walk after. So then we all got our needs met. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's awesome. And it's a great way to have relevant self-care so that you could do all of the things and get your dog what she needed, you what you needed, and your neighbor gets to help, which, surprisingly, a lot of people would love for you to say, wow, I could help you. I could show up for your life. And all I have to do is let your dog run around in my backyard.
I know. Awesome. It's so simple. It's so simple.
Yep.
And just, I would like to say, because it was, Ben Diesel Donlow. That episode is called Be the Light.
Yeah.
Remember in that episode, he said, okay, Lindsay, okay, Amber, I plan on following up with y'all to see if you're doing your
Yes.
task.
Yeah.
I just want to do a quick shout out to Diesel Donlow and say, hey-o, I signed up for my yoga classes. I finally did it.
I'm still working on the breathing. We haven't gotten rid of the asthma yet, but we're doing better on the breathing.
Progress. Yeah.
Progress. Yes. Practice makes progress. Okay. So obviously I could talk for probably another hour on different self-care ideas, but I think that we've given folks enough to get the wheels turning, because I think part of this is the satisfaction of figuring out what works for you and allowing yourself that time and space to sit and think, what do I really need? What do I really want? And, you know, if that's 5 minutes of quiet time, you know, it sounds simple, but it's effective.
And it's kind of hard to come to that conclusion too. So I think one big takeaway from this episode I'd like to encourage people to do is just take a moment, check in with yourself and say, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself today?
I love that. Yeah.
Or if it's, you know, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself right now?
Yep.
So that you're not putting the pressure of future-oriented stuff going on. Maybe you just need to focus on right here, right now, which is usually the best thing. But, you know, check in with yourself about that. Ask yourself, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself? Is it to not go to that Christmas party tonight? Is it to, you know, not do whatever the thing is? Maybe. Is it to leave the dirty dishes in the sink? Maybe. You got to do what you got to do.
Stress me out. That does happen in our house sometimes, but I too, there's something about the dishes in the sink not being in the sink. I'm a big fan.
Sure, I am too. And if I don't get to it, that's okay.
Yeah, it's also okay.
You know, I'm gonna still be okay. I'm gonna still be able to sleep at night, because at the end of the day, if that's what I needed to prioritize was going to bed on time, because I've been staying up till 1 o'clock every morning for the whole week prior, then let the dishes sit there. They'll be okay. I'll get to them.
So you actually just brought up another great point that I do want to share before we close out for the day.
Okay.
I think so often, especially with folks in my circle, we make big, long lists. We take great satisfaction in creating a list and marking the things off.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay and normal and will happen often that not everything on your list will get done. And it's a matter of prioritization, right? It's a matter of figuring out what are the critical few, because if you have a list that is on like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and there's 75 things on it, you are not getting those things done today. And you need to break that down into like bite-sized chunks. If you take anything away from me, figure out the ones that actually matter and do those, and be okay leaving the rest on your list for another day. Because I think an old Amber would have heard all of these things that have been shared today. I would have written them all down on a list and been like, I'm going to do all of these things. I want to try them and see how they work out. Yeah. And I would have been disappointed in myself if I didn't get them all done in, you know, whatever the time frame.
Because it's self-sabotaging. It's just not realistic. You feel like a failure, and then you go from, and this is again, when we get into neurodiversity, just want to bring that full circle here is, oh, sorry guys, you can tell Ellie just walked in.
She's tap dancing. I love it.
Really? Oh, that was funny. Gosh, that just screwed up my whole train of thought.
That's okay. We were talking about neurodiversity and self-sabotage and making long lists and not getting them done.
Yeah, I forgot it. It's already gone. Good. I was going to say something. Yep, it's gone, guys. So P.S., did I mention I have ADHD? Can you guys tell? I mean, speaking of neurodiversity, this right here is such a classic example, is that when I have it, when it's on the tip of my tongue, I've got to say it. And if I don't say it right then and there, it goes just as quickly as it comes. So long, the thought's gone. I can't finish it. So here I am. This is me being human.
I love that. And it's okay. Give yourself grace, because that thought is going to come back probably in a few hours. I'll get a text message.
The grace is there. I'm not so
Good.
Yeah, I'm not going to be hard on myself. It is what it is. And this is exactly the point though, guys, is like to be hard on yourself, forget it. It's just, it's not serving you. It's not serving others. It is not for your highest good. Just let the shit go.
Amen on that. And I think that's a great place to end the episode today. I would like to kindly remind all of our listeners to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, please and thank you. You will definitely want to benefit from seeing our facial expressions, our random gestures, and the surprise guests that sometimes pop onto the screen.
It's true, like my dog Ellie just now. And in case you guys are wondering about how to access YouTube or the channel on YouTube, it's youtube.com/@whatthefoxpodcast. And use that same handle for like Instagram, TikTok, and other places as well.
Absolutely. And all that information will be in the show notes for you as well. We would love to hear your feedback on today's episode, what self-care means to you as a highly sensitive person, or any feedback or thoughts you have on today's episode as a whole. We're grateful for y'all and you listening, and we will see you next Tuesday.
That's right. Bye, y'all.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.